Geico makes it easy to get affordable renter's insurance in as little as 90 seconds. And then you'll start to wonder why everything else isn't so fast. Like, why does it take so long to do the dishes? A meal that's gone in 3 requires 45 minutes worth of dishes. Doesn't make sense. But it does make sense to get renter's insurance through Geico. That way, that pile of dirty dishes and the other things you love are covered. Get more with Geico.
Geico's motorcycle expertise gives me the coverage I need, like 24/7 claims. I'm on cloud 9.
Disclaimer, clouds are wholly unable to support the weight of an adult human.
What's happening?
Furthermore, clouds are not numbered. Even if you procured a jetpack and searched, you'd find no cloud numbered 9. However, at that altitude, you'd likely befriend a flock of migrating snow geese.
Geese?
Who'd encourage you to leave your 24/7 Geico motorcycle claims insurance behind, as they would take you in and even share their dinner of crickets and clovers with you.
Ew.
Geico assumes no liability for any indigestion that may occur from a clover cricket dinner. Geico, expertise for your motorcycle.
Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Today's case is one of those crimes you might vaguely remember if you're of an age, but you can't quite recall the specifics because 1, it was a white-collar crime, which means there is little crime scene evidence to pore over that isn't a complex financial spreadsheet, and that's no fun. And 2, who the hell ever heard of lysine, the amino acid that started this whole mess? Oh, and 3, who cares if a bunch of agribusiness men spent years meeting at various spots around the globe to be sure they all agreed on its price? Well, you should care. As John Connor, Purdue University economist, explained,
at the end of 3 years, when they had raised prices over that period, they made an estimated $200 to $250 million of additional profits. Of course, it's a very profitable way to do business. In the United States, it's a felony. It's illegal.
It's called price fixing, and when it happened, it meant that everybody, you, me, your parents, big food producers, little farmers, and the whole concept of a free market got screwed. Granted, this type of crime isn't on par with murder, but the effects of it might well have been deadly. We know it cost people money, lots and lots of it, in fact, but we can't easily track how that money loss impacted every person who felt it. Could someone have snapped? Absolutely. We do know, after all, that one of the men at the center of the case attempted suicide. So rest assured, this was a capital B big deal. It would turn out to be one of history's greatest corporate conspiracies that not only showed how international businesses can and do collude to fix prices, but also how the questionable ethics inside each of those companies made it almost inevitable. The specific crime we're going to talk about today occurred in the early 1990s, just as the agricultural products giant Archer Daniels Midland was developing bioproduct technology in an effort to produce bioengineered products that went beyond what the company had long excelled at, which was grinding grain and corn for feed and as an occasional food additive. It was now among a few world corporations figuring out how to do something downright miraculous. Let me allow Kurt Eichenwald, former New York Times reporter and author of The Informant, to explain by quoting a paragraph in his copiously researched bestseller, first published in 2000. Quote, "It was veering into biotechnology, feeding dextrose from corn to tiny microbes. Over time, those microbes, or bugs as they were known, convert the sugar into an amino acid called lysine. As people in the business like to say, the bugs ate the dextrose and crapped lysine. In animal feed, lysine bulked up chickens and pigs, just the product needed by giant food companies like Tyson and Conagra. End quote. Now, Eichenwald is smart to also tell us that ADM was doing all its other grain processing, such that you could find the company's fingers in almost everything on our supermarket shelves. Everything almost all of us eat from the veritable get-go, cradle to grave. Baby formula and cereal, Jell-O, Star-Kissed tuna, yogurt, Hellmann's mayo, pepperoni, popsicles, Doritos, ad nauseum ad infinitum. ADM claimed it was the supermarket to the world, and that wasn't mere hype. In 1990, a 32-year-old guy with a lot of lofty-sounding degrees was head of ADM's bioproducts division. His name was Mark Whitacre. While he was in charge, the division became the company's fastest growing, something for which he was given a lot of credit. He would also be the key to sending ADM executives to prison just 5 years later, and to having the company pay enormous fines for their purposeful, well-designed scheme to defraud customers and consumers, all courtesy of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Whitacre would set the feds on his company in short order, a seeming hero to the rest of us who were harmed, even if it was just overpaying for a dozen eggs, by his company's actions. Now, I say seeming hero because Whitacre would prove to be the most complex and baffling, disturbed and deranged liars ever to cross into white hat territory. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Skims. You know what, partner Scott?
What's that?
Yesterday I was wearing a bralette from Skims, and it was so comfortable, I forgot all about it. Didn't take it off and slept all night in it. You know what usually happens when I fall asleep wearing a bra?
Literally no idea.
I wake up with these deep, horrible grooves in my skin because bras ain't for sleeping. But that didn't happen this time. That's how comfortable Skims bralettes are. I'm telling you, Skims Fits Everybody collection is fantastic. I know I'm the last person to try Skims on the planet, but it's worth the hype. The fabric is like so stretchy and soft, it really conforms to your body without feeling clingy. It's amazing. I'm eyeballing a bunch of other stuff on the website too, and I have to mention how many sizes and colors they have.
The Fits Everybody collection is available in sizes extra, extra small to 4X.
You can shop now at skims.com and at Skims stores. After you place your order, be sure to let them know I sent you. Select podcast in the survey, and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the perfect gift for your Valentine's or for yourself, Skims just launched their best Valentine's shop ever. Available in sizes for women, men, and kids. Lysine is an essential amino acid. The human body doesn't make it, so we eat it. It's in meat, fish, eggs, dairy, legumes, nuts, seeds. If you don't get enough of the stuff, the side effects aren't fun. Fatigue, nausea, agitation, anemia, slow growth, even reproductive disorders. Now, before you run to consult Dr. Google, know that you probably get plenty. Most people do. But somewhere along the way, farmers figured that their meat animals could use more of it. When pigs, for example, got more lysine in their diets, they were more muscular and protein-rich. Farmers could feed more people with a single pig. In the late 1950s, industrial production of lysine began. For some reason, they like to refer to the process as fermentation rather than bug poopification. Go figure. ADM got into the biz in the late 1980s, and by February 1991 was the largest U.S. manufacturer of lysine. In September of 1992, the production plant began having some problems. They just couldn't get the little bugs to make dextrose. They had bought what they thought were good bugs from Ajinomoto, a Japanese firm, and yet they weren't performing at the suburban Chicago plant where they were supposed to be happily pooping out sugar. Mark Whitacre was trying everything to fix the matter, including tap dancing a bit for his bosses in order to buy some time to rectify the problem, which was costing ADM $7 million a month. That's in 1992. It translates to more than twice that in today's money. Now, in early November, Whitacre reported to his bosses that a fellow named Fujiwara, one of the Japanese company's executives, had called him and offered to explain why the bugs were malfunctioning for the tidy sum of $10 million. He gave a hint. The Japanese had infected the bug with a virus and had help from within the American plant to do so. Now, you need to know that the man who was in charge at ADM was no slouch. Dwayne Andreas was a friend to high-level politicians, sat in on White House meetings, had entertained Mikhail Gorbachev in Decatur, the rinky-dink Illinois town that housed ADM's largest plant, and could pretty much tell everybody what to do because he funded everybody's campaigns. He once went to Moscow, something that was at the time flouting American foreign policy, and made deals anyway. Nobody blinked. When he was told about this Lysine sabotage attempt, he called his friends at the CIA, who called the FBI, and voila, the feds dropped in to talk to Whitacre. FBI Special Agent Brian Shepard was given a bit of a runaround before he got to speak to Whitacre, who appeared nervous in his recounting of the story. Shepard worked to calm him, assuring he was just looking to learn if there was enough to the story to start an investigation. Whitacre came back the next day to say his daughter had been contacted at her boarding school and was told to pass along a message to her father indicating possible harm to him and his family if he didn't pay up for the information. This whole story about the virus baffled some people with biotech cred. The bugs were too hard to transport and too hard to mess with for this to be true. But Andreas authorized Whitacre to offer Fujiwara $3 million for the name of the guy inside who had helped him. The FBI, on hearing about Whitacre's 15-year-old daughter and ADM's continuing concerns, wanted to talk to Whitacre again. Because of Whitacre's prior evening plans, they all arranged to speak at 10 p.m. at the Whitacre home, an historic manse once owned by ADM's CEO. It was a 13,000 square foot manor with an 8-car garage and horse stables on the property, all situated in a gated community in a town of 2,000. The FBI guys had no trouble bypassing the guard at the gate. They had no idea what awaited them. As Whitacre explained in an interview with WSRE, a Pensacola, Florida PBS station, the conversation at first went exactly as Whitacre had hoped it would.
I was coached what to say and what not to say by our management before those meetings, and I stuck with what I was coached. So within 3 or 4 days, the FBI would have been gone. It would never have been a problem for the company.
That could have been the end of it.
But they wanted to meet again a second time, the same day that I met him the first time, at our home.
Agent Schaefer had simply expected to make arrangements for the house phone to be tapped so that the agency could determine exactly from where the Fujiwara calls were originating. But Whitacre's wife was a perceptive woman. She could tell her husband was anxious.
She said, well, what are you nervous? If they're trying to help you, what are you so nervous about? And that's when I told her about the price fixing, and she never even heard of the words price fixing. I'd explained to her what it was and how it's ripping off the consumers and how we're ripping off our customers and how it's adding hundreds of millions of dollars a month of extra profit. And that's when she put her foot down. When the FBI was coming to our house, she said if I did not tell them why they were there, she would tell them. And so the FBI came to our house about an hour after I told my wife. And I still stuck with what the company coached me. And it's the point when they were about ready to leave, that's when she put her foot down that either I tell them or she was going to. Then they stayed another 4 hours where I told them all about the illegal activity.
Schaefer had run through Whitacre's story again, gotten some critical technical information, and left with various pleasantries all around, only to be stopped at his car as he was about to drive away. "Got a minute?" Whitacre had yelled from his porch. Then he climbed into Schaefer's car, and Whitacre, as he said, told him everything. He explained that there was a widespread policy of price fixing among all ADM divisions. He knew the most about the bioproducts division since he was in charge there, and he was in on most of those meetings and knew all the players. He assured Schaefer this was a clear directive about how ADM did business straight from Dwayne Andreas and his son Mick. This was a bombshell of epic proportion. If true, the company was guilty of violating federal law on a previously unheard of scale. Schaefer took notes. There was so much work ahead, so many questions. Like, would Whitacre continue to meet him? Would he be willing to tape the conversations? Would he cooperate with the FBI? Would he sign an immunity agreement? Did he understand what he was doing and what this meant in terms of time and energy and how it could affect his career? And lastly, Schaefer asked himself, why was this guy telling all this to the FBI? What reason did he have? Was he just a guy with a conscience? A man whose ethics simply couldn't tolerate the shenanigans? He could have simply left the company to go where the dealings were more to his taste. Why tell? Hard to figure, but the two men would have a lot of time together in coming months. He'd figure it out. In short order, Whitacre agreed to tape his co-workers. First, he was given a simple tape recorder that went into his vest pocket. Then he was given something for his briefcase, then something that was strapped onto his body and activated by a switch in his pants pocket. Pretty soon, he was delivering promising material to Schaefer and Robert Herndon, another agent now assigned to him. It was a mighty small crew of G-men tasked to investigate what would become one of the largest white-collar crimes in U.S. history. But no one knew that yet, so it was all low-key and simple to begin with. It was cloak and dagger spy stuff with Schaefer, but of the small-time, small-town variety. Usually the FBI would place a call to Whitacre's voicemail and leave a number, say 312. That was the room number in a predetermined hotel where Whitacre was to come to deliver what he had gathered. By the time this was all over, he would record more than 1,500 conversations. This number did not include those recorded or filmed by the FBI using their own equipment in hotel conference rooms where they'd place bugs. But Whitacre had no idea what he had signed up for. He thought it would all be over in a few weeks. That was nowhere near the case. He would, in the end, cooperate for more than 3 years.
Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Faye Nutrition. I don't make New Year's resolutions as a rule, and yet I recently made a resolution, and it so happens to still be near the start of the new year, so make of that what you will. And what's my resolution, Scott?
Eating better. We've both been talking about that a lot.
That's right, and I'm not too proud to say that I might need a little extra help with meeting this goal, which is why I'm excited to check out our latest sponsor, Faye Nutrition. Faye is a revolutionary platform that connects you with your own personal registered dietitian, making expert nutrition guidance accessible and affordable. So whether you're looking for help losing weight, improving your general health, or managing a health condition, Faye has a dietitian that's right for you.
Do they accept insurance?
They do. All dietitians on Faye accept insurance with over 700 insurance plans accepted.
That's a big deal.
It is. 93% of Faye clients reported an improved relationship with food, and 85% reached their target weight.
Well, we've been talking about eating better, but when it comes time to do it, I know I feel overwhelmed. Maybe this will help.
Achieve lasting results with the help of a registered dietitian through Faye. Listeners of Crimes of the Centuries can qualify to see a registered dietitian for as little as $0 by visiting faynutrition.com/COTC. That's faynutrition.com/COTC.
One last time, that's faynutrition.com/COTC. Make sure you use the URL so they know I sent you.
If you love to travel, Capital One has a rewards credit card that's perfect for you. With the Capital One Venture X card, you earn unlimited double miles on everything you buy. Plus, you get premium benefits at a collection of luxury hotels when you book on Capital One Travel. And with Venture X, you get access to over 1,000 airport lounges worldwide. Open up a world of travel possibilities with the Capital One Venture X card. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Lounge access is subject to change. See CapitalOne.com for details.
In the beginning, and for a good long while, all the FBI noticed was that their ADM informant, Mark Whitacre, who at first had been so sketchy and scared, seemed to enjoy the work. Maybe too much. He simply could not wait to call the agents and report what he had heard and turn over the tapes and talk endlessly about how this was going to work out so good for him because he believed that the revelations about wholesale price fixing at ADM were going to sink the Andreas father and son team. And the board of directors would be so grateful to Whitacre for his unearthing the scam that they'd promote him to run the company. And he imagined he'd be this 30-something wunderkind steering the ship of a multi-billion international agribusiness into the 21st century. Special Agents Schaefer and Herndon tried to dissuade Whitacre of the notion. They said they could make no promises about what would happen, that there was a chance he would not be thanked for his efforts. That first things first, they all needed to figure out how to get ADM execs on tape directing the illegal antitrust activity, and then they needed to get all of the cartel members on tape agreeing to a common price for lysine. That's really what the feds called it, by the way, the lysine cartel. Usually when I hear cartel, I think of drugs, but the proper definition is any association of manufacturers or suppliers with the purpose of maintaining prices at a high level and restricting competition. Laws against them date way back in the U.S. Here's the PSA portion of today's episode.
Antitrust laws were originally created at the end of the 19th century in response to the excesses of corporations that controlled oil, steel, railroads, and other industries. President Benjamin Harrison called them dangerous conspiracies against the public good. Since then, antitrust law has set the ground rules for the pursuit of profits within our economy. Although antitrust laws arose during the time of horse and buggies, the grievances that prompted their creation remain today.
Anyway, assigning Whitacre to gather all this recorded evidence was a huge ask. Because the two Japanese companies and the Korean company who held the largest share of the lysine market, along with ADM, weren't headed by dummies. They knew the antitrust laws in the United States, and they were not anxious to break the laws openly. So they made sure cartel summit meetings took place elsewhere, in places like Budapest, Mexico City, and Tokyo. The FBI even taped the men joking about inviting the FBI and the SEC to attend. That got a big laugh. At one such meeting, one of the Japanese execs grew serious and asked, "United States is very severe for the control of antitrust activities, no?" To the FBI folk who heard the tape, that meant only one thing. The men in that room had just admitted to having the intent to break American law. But the FBI, of course, was not anxious to break the law of another country either, so they were, for the most part, prohibited from taping anybody saying anything if it was spoken outside of the U.S. Within the borders of the U.S., they likewise taped only when Whitacre was present, so that they'd have permission of at least one person in the room to record. If he left to go to the men's room, they had to shut off all their equipment until he returned. The FBI was willing to play the long game if they had to. On any occasion that one or more of the parties met in the U.S., the FBI had video cameras hidden in table lamps and Whitacre wired up like Christmas lights. They even had to shave his chest and back hair to properly affix the equipment. Whitacre, meanwhile, continued to also tape any phone conversation he had with his competitors, as well as any in-house chats that happened, planned or spontaneous. Throughout the early 90s, evidence was piling up. The FBI added Joe Weatherall, an experienced agent, to the case. Meanwhile, lysine was priced pretty high for those companies and small farm operations that used it. The product line was no longer a $2 million annual burden on ADM's bottom line. Instead, it would account for $55 million in profit in 1994. Here's one of Whitacre's bosses, Terry Wilson, on tape, explaining to the cartel's members that customers are chumps.
They are not my friends. You're my friend. I want to be closer to you than I am to any customer.
And here's one of their customers, Paul Behan, owner of AAA egg farms in California.
We're in a business where a penny is huge. And I'm talking about a penny a dozen, not a penny an egg. To give you an idea, if my cost of production is a penny greater than it needs to be, in a small farm like this, to me that's $160,000 a year. It's one significant component in the end of what I do, and this going away.
He was their enemy. They said so. Dwayne Andreas even said it on record. That was the mentality. Behind the scenes, Whitacre vacillated between G-Man Deluxe and a man afraid of his own shadow. He would need constant praise for his efforts, and yet tell the agents that he was deeply afraid of the consequences should anyone frisk him or see any recording device in his belongings. Later, on a show called Doing It Right with Valerie Sokolowski, Whitacre claimed he lost 60 pounds during that time and that his coworkers had shown concern that he might have cancer because he looked so pale.
I tell you, wearing a wire, Valerie, was the most stressed that I've ever went through my life. Especially, like you said, when you see the documentary, when the FBI say, Mark, if these guys catch you, they're going to kill you.
Yeah.
And to hear that 2 or 3 times a month for 3 years took a tremendous toll. Tremendous toll. Prison was a cakewalk compared to wearing a wire for 3 years against some of the most powerful men, including billionaires, in the world.
The investigation would catch a break when the group met in Paris and Whitacre suggested that they all meet at the American Embassy. Embassies, no matter where they're parked, are technically always on American land where American law can be enforced. But the federal prosecutors who were overseeing exactly what crimes were taking place here and whether the FBI had collected enough evidence to get an indictment and a solid winnable case kept pushing for more definitive proof of wrongdoing. In what constituted a long legal conversation between lawyers in Illinois and those in the DOJ in Washington, D.C., the issue boiled down to the word agreement. They had to have the world's top 5 lysine manufacturers agree out loud and on tape to fix the price and control volume before they were going to arrest anyone. That happened in March 1994 when Whitacre, with a prompt from the FBI, enticed the decision-makers to Maui's Sheraton Makaha Resort and Country Club to meet and play some golf under the warm Hawaiian sun. The issue in question early on was trust. It was the elephant in the room. Could they trust one another not to waver from the price they set, even if it was a detriment to their own company to do so? It was what all those meetings and all the phone conversations were about. Was there honor among thieves? This Hawaiian meeting had included even some smaller companies whose share of the lysine market was dwarfed by the bigs, but they had to agree as well. Men from the 5 companies represented talked about what percentage of the market each would get. If the market dropped, the percentage would stay the same. This was a necessary component in the government's case. They had to not only agree to the price, but agree how to control the market itself. They seemed to be gathering around the fire to sing Kumbaya when Kanji Momoto, an executive from the Japanese company Ajinomoto, laughed and said, quote, "So 5 companies agree on quantity for the first time," end quote. Bingo. You would think that the Department of Justice and the FBI would be delighted now, and they were, but they would learn pretty fast that they had a problem with their star cooperating witness.
Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, fresh pastas, and artisanal pastries. Scott, you know how much I like Wild Grain.
I do. You made something from Wild Grain the first time I came over.
I did. Apple pie bites. I loved them. Loved them.
They're probably the reason we hit it off.
Yeah, priorities shift when you're dating in your 40s. You know what hasn't changed? How awesome Wild Grain is. Wild Grain's boxes are fully customizable to your taste and dietary restrictions. So they've got their classic variety box, which is what I used back then. Now they also have a gluten-free box and a plant-based box that's 100% vegan.
And every item bakes from frozen in 25 minutes or less?
Yep. with no thawing required.
Hold the phone.
Are you ready to bring all your favorite carbs right to your doorstep? Be sure to check out Wild Grain so you can begin building your own box of artisanal breads, pastas, and pastries. For a limited time, you can get $30 off the first box plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/COTC to start your subscription. You heard me, free croissants in every box and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/COTC.
That's wildgrain.com/COTC, or you can use promo code COTC at checkout.
Apparently, at almost every turn from the very beginning, there were things that Mark Whitacre decided on his own to withhold from his federal agent handlers. Because, he'd read John Grisham's The Firm, and he knew that Mitch McDear, Tom Cruise in the movie, outsmarted his handlers and those he was spying on for them. McDear got to have his cake and eat it too. Whitacre figured he was surely as smart as McDear, though maybe Whitacre missed that McDear was a guy that Grisham made up. He was fiction. This was not. Meanwhile, in Mobile, Alabama, an FBI agent named Craig Daly was investigating possible espionage within Degussa, a German agricultural company that had a large branch in the U.S. Daly had evidence of someone outside the company paying for insider information about the production of something called methionine, another one of those essential amino acids necessary for protein creation. This was the trafficking of stolen information. The outsider issuing the checks? Mark Whitacre. You heard that right. The government's star witness in its largest antitrust case ever was being investigated by the same government agency for something different altogether. The government had not moved yet on ADM. The FBI continued to gather evidence, making tapes, while prosecutors wrangled among themselves about who was going to present the case and how. It was even trying to hammer out how Whitacre would be helped financially when things blew up. Whitacre had given the agents a packet of information showing that he spent $17,680 a month. In today's money, that'd be just over $38,000 a month, or about $450,000 a year. Let us all agree that he was well compensated, and he was quite worried about remaining so after the price fixing came to light.
And I started asking him, I said, now, what happens when I get kicked out for being the whistleblower? Are you guys going to protect me? Are you going to protect me from financially? Because I had a large home and cars. We had kids in private schools. When you make those kind of salaries, our expenses also went up accordingly.
Whitacre was still in place at ADM, even once revealing to regional managers that he had the numbers for what the market would be and how much would be manufactured by ADM's competitors. They were rightly astonished at information that could only have been gotten illegally. But he was like that. He took risks. He engaged in oddly obsessive behaviors. For example, he would brush the family's horses for hours at a time in the middle of the night. On June 27, 1995, the FBI met with Mick Andreas, Dwayne's son and heir apparent to the ADM CEO post. They had him on tape. They had piles and piles of evidence against his company. They were going to try to turn him into a witness for the prosecution in order to gain more intel. Found at home in the early evening, Mick Andreas denied his company had ever engaged in price fixing. He was allowed to listen to a few tapes. Still, he maintained his position. There was no stopping what was about to happen then, they said. Minutes later, an army of FBI agents walked into ADM headquarters with search warrants and a carefully drawn plan detailing whose office was to be swept, which cache of documents was to be confiscated. Agents also went to the homes of executives, including that of Dwayne Andreas. Nobody was admitting anything. Everybody lawyered up after a rash of phone calls to their well-connected friends in the nation's capital. Even in this company, Mark Whitacre proved to be the worst kind of loose cannon. He had told quite a few people in his office of the impending FBI raid. To do that, he had to divulge that he was a mole inside ADM and that he had the goods on his bosses and coworkers. The news barely rippled through the country. What had happened? What had they been looking for? Have no worries. Mark Whitacre decided to talk when the Wall Street Journal came knocking. He wanted his story told. He figured, again, that he would be a hero and the fresh CEO of ADM, if only people knew. By now, he was a persona non grata at work, and it was clear the board of directors were not going to thank him for his efforts on their behalf. Soon enough, the Journal's headline read, "Seeds of Doubt, an executive becomes informant for the FBI, stunning giant ADM." Now the FBI guys in Mobile, Alabama knew something they didn't already know about Mark Whitacre. It would take a few months to unravel, and it would involve a lot of crazy machinations on Whitacre's part over the previous 5 years, but what the Mobile agents thought was theft was really embezzlement on a grand scale. ADM fired him in August for what they thought was embezzlement of something like $2.5 million. Spoiler alert, it was actually a lot more than that. Whitacre swore later the age-old excuse that everybody did it. This was not good for the Justice Department's case. The agency was panicking now, busy looking for someone else to use as a cooperating witness because theirs had proven himself to be as credible as a mob boss. It was chaos, disgrace, and embarrassment they would weather. The same could be said of Mark Whitacre. He went home, put himself in the driver's seat of his BMW convertible, started the engine, and closed tight inside his garage, trying to kill himself. His gardener found him. He was institutionalized for his own safety. Derek Miller, a psychiatrist who spent a lot of time with him, diagnosed a flurry of things that were wrong with the FBI's informant. From Eichenwald's book, quote, "The differential diagnosis is clearly between a bipolar illness which has been brought on by the stress of his behavior, or it is possible that he has a frontal lobe lesion which is slow growing and has led to a deterioration of his ethical attitude. Until 3 or 4 years ago, he was apparently an honest man, and there was no evidence of any antisocial behavior in his youth or heretofore. In addition, there is some evidence that he might be organically damaged." End quote. Miller also listed other possible diagnoses, including organic mood disorder, mixed bipolar disorder without psychotic features, adult antisocial behavior, and narcissistic personality disorder. Not sure how the FBI and the DOJ felt about that, but within days of his suicide attempt, Fortune magazine had an exclusive which detailed everything they had and were planning to use at trial. Seemed Whitacre had talked to the publication before he had his apparent breakdown. The whole affair spiraled to conclusion with the Japanese and Korean agricultural giants admitting wrongdoing and ultimately testifying at ADM's criminal trial. Whitacre's embezzlement trial was seen before the same federal judge who must surely have thought she was in the middle of a circus. Because when the truth about why Whitacre needed money came out, why he began his life of crime, it was almost laughable. He had apparently fallen for the email plea of a man from Nigeria. You know, the one who is a prince and his money is being held hostage or something, and he needs just a small infusion of cash to get it back, and you'll be handsomely rewarded for your kindness. Yeah, he fell for that and lost some $200,000. From there, it just snowballed. Whitacre largely seems to forget that part of his glory days when he's talking to groups about his own special brand of outrage and pretending to be Mr. Do-Right on behalf of the American consumer. Fact is, while he was the so-called insider informant for the FBI about ADM's wrongdoing, he stole $9 million from ADM. And he justifies it this way.
I wore this wire for 3 years and 3 different recorders, and I felt like I risked my job, risked my career. I had a great career path. 1 week before I met the FBI in November 1992, 1 week before, I was also promoted to corporate vice president of the whole company and was told by management that I was likely to be the next president of the whole company. And that was 1 week before I met the FBI. So I had a very, very good career path. I was only age 32 when I obtained that job, and I was age 34 when I started working with the FBI in 1992. So I was on a good career path. I was going to lose that career path by being the whistleblower. And I looked at that as my severance.
He stole the money by way of taking kickbacks from companies he dealt with, or from shuffling money around his division, or by invoicing things that were never ordered and never delivered, or creating fake contracts, or just plain padding expenses. He had used his friends, his family, banks in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, false names, and 1,000 lies to steal. He would now have you believe it was what he had to do to protect himself post-revelation of his being their mole. Truth was, his family was living far beyond even their very considerable means. Here he is, talking about trying to nail the FBI down on how much money he'd get once his primary source of income, ADM and the money he stole from them, was in the rearview mirror.
They kept saying, we're working on it with our bosses. They said they were Illinois FBI agents, and they were talking to the Washington, D.C. executives or their bosses, and they said, we're working on it, we're going to try to do something, but I didn't feel secure. I just felt like they were trying, even to the point I felt so insecure, I started even taping the FBI. And I was taping him trying to make a commitment to protect me financially when I got fired.
Never mind that at the same time he worried about all of this, he was outing himself to his colleagues on a regular basis. In the summer of 1995, just after the first raid, reporters from the New York Times and Washington Post began questioning Whitacre's educational credentials. He claimed to have a master's degree in business administration from Northwestern University. Officials at the school could find no evidence of that. He also claimed to have earned a doctorate in biochemistry from Cornell. It was, in fact, in nutrition. Give him credit, he had managed to get a bachelor's and master's from Ohio State at the same time through an accelerated program there. Now, reporters also delved into the tragic backstory he had told everyone in his professional life. His poor parents had been killed in an auto accident when he was very young, he said. He had been adopted by wealthy neighbors who raised him. But the reporters found his parents were very much alive. His father was what the Post described as a fast-talking, polyester-wearing car dealer. The reporters soon discovered that Whitacre did not just lie when it clearly served him, but sometimes he lied for no reason at all. It's telling that the government's lead prosecutor referred to Whitacre in his opening remarks to the jury in the ADM price-fixing case this way, quote, "Don't believe a word he said. We don't. Listen to the tapes," end quote. As you might expect, the business world reeled from the indictments, the trial, and the verdict that followed. Stock prices for ADM fell. Boycotts of their products were launched. In October 1996, ADM paid $100 million, the largest fine in history, for price fixing. The money, by the way, was slated to go to the Treasury Fund for crime victims. Mick Andreas and Terry Wilson went to prison. In early 1997, a U.S. subsidiary of pharmaceutical behemoth Bayer AG agreed to pay a $50 million criminal fine for its involvement in ADM's fixing of citric acid prices. Probes were launched in Asia, Europe, and the U.S., with at least 3 grand juries looking at 20 companies suspected of wrongdoing associated with ADM. Civil lawsuits were also filed, most were settled, but not before the companies involved paid many more millions to do so. Executives at 2 Japanese firms and one based in Korea agreed to plead guilty and pay steep criminal fines. In the case of the Japanese, their companies also had to pay $10 million in fines, the most allowed by U.S. antitrust law. Whitacre was, by then, safely tucked away, not in the witness protection program, but in a minimum security federal prison where he was set to serve 9 years after his conviction for embezzlement, tax evasion, and money laundering. In 1998, the European markets demanded their pound of flesh, placing a €176 million fine on ADM and the rest of the companies involved in the Lysine cartel. Canadian farmers were having none of it either, asking for and getting $400 million in reparations from ADM for the losses they suffered in a class action suit. That wasn't all. Companies who had tangential ties to ADM were caught up in the FBI's investigation of a widespread multinational price-fixing conspiracy. By 1999, the government had levied more than $1 billion in fines that were paid by an array of companies who supply the American consumer with daily goods. Did the single case of ADM's plot cost the American consumer money? You bet your ass it did. Those companies who use lysine could seek, but never find, better prices or better deals on lysine. Smaller producers also had no chance to compete and perhaps drive the prices down as supply increased. The scandal had its upside. The world of agribusiness was suddenly required to be more transparent, with government scrutiny sharpened and on the lookout for price manipulation. Hence the billion that went into the nation's coffers. After all, Whitacre had opened a door into ADM that proved that price fixing was what Eichenwald termed a way of life. Citric acid was already being looked at, but Whitacre's tapes showed that other possible markets, like those for MSG, lactic acid, and high fructose corn syrup, were also likely being artificially determined. Which means that a lot of people knew how we were getting screwed, and Whitacre spoke up, granted at the behest of his wife Ginger, who vowed that if he didn't tell, she would. I wonder if she would have had she known the repercussions. Mark Whitacre served 9.5 years in prison and was forced to pay $11.4 million in restitution. Behind bars, he found God and stabilizing medication. He came out all shiny and is now paid to talk about corporate misbehavior and how good executives go bad. ADM Vice Chairman Mick Andreas and former ADM Division Chief Terry Wilson were given identical sentences of 24 months in prison and $350,000 in fines. Wilson died in 2006. Dwayne Andreas died in 2016. His son Mick died 5 years later. Whitacre works as an executive director of Coca-Cola Consolidated, the largest distributor in the country of Coke products, many of which contain fructose, which was one of the ADM divisions accused of price fixing in 1995. Life is funny. So, apparently, is business. Today, according to the Shipping and Commodity Academy, ADM has a market capitalization value of more than $30 billion. Don't say crime doesn't pay. It can. It does. And it will again. In early November 2024, Cheryl Estrada of Fortune magazine wrote a story about ADM's continuing issues with, well, let's call it truth. Headline: ADM's multiple accounting errors and SEC probe are highly concerning to investors. It read, quote, "Notable accounting errors in a federal investigation have kept the U.S. agricultural giant Archer Daniels Midland Co. in the spotlight for most of this year. Now more financial mismanagement has caused ADM to abruptly postpone its third-quarter earnings call that was scheduled for Tuesday." End quote. Apparently, in January of 2024, the company's chief financial officer was put on administrative leave after the SEC started asking questions. Estrada's story goes on to enumerate financial integrity questions within the company that lingered after it bought a European company in 2014 for $3 billion. Estrada then went on to explain to her readers that ADM had a checkered history when it comes to accounting. Talk about an understatement. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read The Informant by Kurt Eichenwald, as well as snippets from the federal trial. She read pieces that were written at the time by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Fortune magazine. She reviewed case text legal research in ADM's case against Whitacre and several government filings against ADM. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/GrabBagCollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Benscoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're at centuriespod, and check out our Crimes of the Centuries podcast Facebook page.